Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to talk today about solving equations and with two steps. So you've been doing equations with one step. Now we're going to do two steps. So let's take a look at example number one. If you're following along at home, again, third edition, Algebra 1/2, lesson 61, solving equations in two steps. So take a look at example number one here. Notice that there are three chunks, 1, 2, and 3. Chunks are broken up by addition, subtraction, and an equal sign. Or an equal sign. They're technically called terms, but when we get into polynomials, it's a pain to talk about what the terms are. So I just call them chunks. We'll just call them chunks for right now. So each of those chunks, the idea is you want to get the chunk with the variable by itself. So you see how we have this chunk right here? I want to get that by itself, which means I need to move that 2 to the other side. The way we move things is we do the opposite. So we're adding here, the opposite, subtract, minus 2. Draw my line, cancel out. I get 3x equals 7 minus 2 gives me 5. Now I'm multiplying 3 times x, which means the opposite of multiply is divide. 3 and 3. These guys cancel out. I have x all by itself. 5 divided by 3 doesn't really reduce down, so you just leave it as a fraction. Always leave it as a fraction. The only time you use decimals are if the problem started as decimals or if it's a word problem and decimals make more sense. Most of the time, you're going to leave them as fractions, though. Okay, so now I've got some fractions involved here. What I want to do, we're going to do the same thing that we did before, where we want to get this chunk all by itself, which means we need to move this over. And the way we do that is add 1/2. However, Lordy me, I hate fractions. So we're going to get rid of these fractions straight off the bat. Notice that we have 3, 2, and 3 as a denominator. We want to find a common denominator for all of these things. Well, for 3, 2, and 3, it's going to be 6. So what I want to do is to get 6 on the bottom here, and I need to multiply by 2. And of course, what I do on the bottom, I also need to do on the top. Things are falling over in my house. It's a ghost. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in closer here so that you can kind of see. Okay, so I multiply this by 2 to get 6, but what I do on the bottom, I also have to do on the top. Over here to get 6, I need to multiply by 3 and by 3. Here I need to do by 2, and what I do on the bottom, I've got to do on the top. So now I have this whole new equation, and it is 4x, because the x right here is on the side. You can just bump it right up to the top. That's fine. You can't bump it to the bottom. Don't put it in the bottom, otherwise we're in Algebra 2, and we've got to talk. Over 6 minus 3 over 6 equals 20 over 6. Now, if all of your chunks have the common denominator and you have an equal sign, you cannot do this on expressions, you can only do this on equations, then what you can do is this, cross that out. Our new equation is 4x minus 3 equals 20. That is much easier to solve than if we did it with fractions. So what we want to do is get this chunk by itself. So in order to do that, we need to move this over. What we do there, we do the opposite. So we're subtracting here, we're going to add plus 3 plus 3. The reason why we do that is these guys cancel out. And I'm left with 4x equals 23. Now I'm multiplying here, so the opposite of multiply equals divide, or is divide. Divide, these guys cancel out, and I'm left with x equals 23 over 4, or 4 goes into 23 5 times, right? With a remainder of 3. So, all right, let's do this here. Same idea. We're going to do the same thing. However, we are going to... Bear with me. Whoa, don't want that. Okay. I like to make things as complicated as possible. All right, so we're going to do the same thing, but in order for us to do it, we have to first turn them into improper fractions. So we have 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 more is 7. So 7, 3, and that x gets bumped up to the top, minus 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 more is 6 fifths equals 23 over 10. Now I need a common denominator between 5, 3, and 10. 5 times 3 is 15, but 10 won't go into that. But if I double 15, I get 30, and 30 goes into all of those. So I'm going to multiply this by 10 to get 30. What I do on the bottom, I have to do up top. Multiply this by 6 to get 30. Do it on the top and bottom. Multiply this by 3 and top and bottom. So now what I have is 70x over 30 minus 36 over 30 equals 23 times 3. I don't want to do it. 69 over 30. All right, all of my chunks have a common denominator here, so I'm going to cancel that one out. And now I have 70x minus 36 equals 69. Now I want to get this chunk with the variable by itself, so I'm going to move this chunk over. And in order to do that, I have to add, because I'm subtracting, and the opposite of subtract is add. So plus 36, because when I do that, this goes away and 70x is all by itself. But what I do to one side, I've got to do to the other. So I get 70x equals 5, carry the 1, 105. 105. Divide this by 70, divide this by 70. This cancels out, this cancels out. X equals 105 divided by 70. These both end in a 5 and 0 though, sorry about that. So I know that I can divide both those by 5. So if I do, there we go, there we go. So I end up with 21 over 14. Now, I can't do 2, 3, or 5, but remember I said sometimes you have to do 7? Looking at those, I see that those are both a factor of 7. So divide by 7, and I end up with 3 over 2. So x equals 1 1/2 or 3 over 2. Write it both ways, okay? Good. All right, so those are all the examples that you have, or for the examples for this lesson. Your problems are on the next page. Here are the problems. Go ahead and pause the video, give those a shot, try that, and come on back. All right, so let's do this first one. 3, 6, and 2. I think our common denominator is going to be 6. I multiply this by 2, 6, I don't have to do anything. This I'm going to multiply by 3 and by 3. So I end up with 4x6 minus 1 over 6 equals 3 over 6. Now all my chunks have the same common denominator, so 4x minus 1 equals 3. I want to get the chunk with the variable by itself, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides. These guys cancel out. I get 4x equals 4. Divide both sides by 4, and I get x equals 1. These guys canceled out. I forgot to write that down. Okay, so let's take a look at number 2 here. Sorry, I'm going to sharpen my pencil. All right. So, again, before we can do anything here, we have to convert it into an improper fraction. So that's 4 and 5. So 5, just broke my pencil. Oh, I should just use mechanical. Okay, 5 halves x plus 1 over 8. Actually, I should say 5x. That would probably make more sense. 5x, because remember I said bump that up to the top, equals 1 over 4. All right, common denominator between 2, 8, and 4 is going to be 8. Multiply this by 4, this by 4. 8, I don't have to do anything with. Multiply this by 2, I get 20x over 8 plus 1 over 8 equals 2 over 8. All of my chunks now have the same common denominator, so, and I have 20x plus 1 equals 2. To get that x by itself, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I get, cancels out, 20x equals 2 minus 1 is 1. Divide both sides by 20. This cancels out, x equals 1 over 20, which cannot be reduced. So we'll leave it right at that. All right, let's take a look at this guy here. Same thing, we have to turn it into an improper fraction. So 5 over 4, and I'll boost that x right up to the top there, minus 1 over 3 equals 3 over 5. All righty, well, if 5 times 4 is 20, but 3 doesn't go into 20. So what we can do is, let's find a common denominator. So 5 is pretty easy. We know that it has a 5 and a 0 at the end. So if we look at 3 and 4, here's 3 and 4. We need to find one that they share that has a 0 at the end. 15, no. 30, but 4 doesn't go into 30. 45, oh, but 4 doesn't go into 45. 60, aha, 4 goes into 60, 60, and what was my other number? Okay, so 60. So what do I need to do? 60 divided by 4 is 15. So I need to multiply this guy by 15 on the top and bottom. 30 goes into 60. We're going to multiply that by, or 3 divided by 60 is 20. So 20 times 3 would give me 60. If I do it on the bottom, I got to do it on the top. 5 goes into 60. Didn't I just do that? Oh, right, 12 times. Times 12, times 12. Okay, so what I have now is 15 times 5, 75. I almost said 45 again. I did that earlier today. 75x over 60 minus 20 over 60 equals 36 over 60. Okay? These chunks all have the same common denominator now. That was a tough one, coming up with 60. So now we have 75x minus 20 equals 36. I want to get this chunk with the variable by itself, so I'm going to add 20 to both sides because that means I need to move this guy, and the opposite of subtracting is adding. So I'm going to add 20 to both sides. This cancels out, and I'm left with 75x equals 56. 75x equals 56. Divide that by 75, divide that by 75. Cancels, cancels. X equals 56 divided by 75. 5 plus 6 is going to give me 11. 3 doesn't go into 11. 2 doesn't go into here, so it's not going to be that. So 3 and 2 can't work. 5 doesn't work. 7 doesn't work. So it's probably just going to be that. So we can leave it as that's the most reduced form. Okay, come on over here. We have 7 and 5. Well, we know that anything for 10, well, first we got to get this guy into an improper fraction. So we've got 2x over 7 plus 1 over 5 equals 20 plus 1 is 21 over 10. So 7 times 5 is 35, but 10 doesn't go into 35. So if we do 7 times 5 is 35, let's double 35. That would give us 70, right? And 70 is going to go into all of these things. So times 10 times 10, 70 divided by 5 is 14. So times 14 times 14, 10, and we're going to 70. Think about that for a second. All right, so now we end up with 20x over 70 plus 14 over 70 equals 21 times 7, 147 over 70. All of our chunks now have a common denominator, so get rid of it. We have 20x plus 14 equals 147. All right, we want to get this chunk with the variable by itself, so we're going to move this chunk to the other side. So minus 14, minus 14. That was dreadful. On the line, cancels out. I get 20x equals 3, 3, 1, 1, 3, 3. Divide both sides by 20. This cancels out, this cancels out. X equals 133 over 20. Let's do a little, oh, sorry about that. Let's do a little side work to see what that is as a mixed number. Words are hard tonight. So I know I can't go into 7 because that would be 140. So 2 goes into 13. So let's do 6. 6 times 12, or 2 is 12 with a 0, 120. So that gives me a remainder of 13. So I get, or 6, 6, and the remainder is 13, so it's going to be 13 over 20, right? 13 over 20. All right, guys, if you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, that is how you solve multi-step or two-step equations. And I will see you next time. Thanks so much.